Today we'll be taking a look at running a report inside of System Center Operation Manager. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So here I am, I'm sitting on the System Center Operation Manager console, and I already have various different roles installed. I have my full SCOM environment up, I have my reporting services installed, and we're all ready to go. And I have several agents that has been reporting into this environment for some time. So what I want to do, I'm going to go down to my reporting section of the console. And within the reporting console, depending on what managed packs you have installed, you will see a variety of reports that may be included with those management packs. And you can also create your own additional reports as you get more familiar with the environment. And if you have the skill set to create SQL Server reporting services reports, you can, and you have familiarity with SQL query language and all of that. If you have those skill sets, you can always build your own. But there's quite a few useful ones built in. So one of the first ones I want to show you here is very easy to run. So if you go down to Windows Server Operating System Reports, there are two reports here. So one that says Performance by System and one that says Performance by Utilization. So let's start with the Performance by System. So once you click on it, you'll see down at the bottom, you'll see the name of the report, and then you'll see a brief description on what that report is intended to show you. So I'll just go ahead and double click on it, and that'll bring me up to this screen here. So in this view here, you need to set your time range that you want your report to run. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set this to run, let's say previous month, say the first day of the previous month through previous month. Well, actually, let's just say this month first day. So we'll get about a month of data. And then on each one, you can set the time when you want that to start. So let's say if I want to start at 12 a.m. on the first day of the previous month through 12 a.m. Well, let's say 12 p.m. through 12 p.m. today. Right. And so next thing we set our time zone. So I'm in Central Time Zone, so I'll leave it there. And then we can set our aggregation. So if we want to aggregate the data on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly basis. So within the SCOM, within the SCOM world, there are two different databases. There's the operation database, and then there's the data warehouse database. So by default, the operations database keeps data for about 7 days. And then the data warehouse database keeps data for 400 days by default if you haven't changed those settings. So this report will pull data from the data warehouse set of the database. So for this report, I'm going to leave it on the daily aggregation. And then we need to go and configure the type of objects or the objects that we want to run the report against. So this is where sometimes it can get a little bit confusing when you're using SCOM, because SCOM will let you run a report against an object that will return no results for the report that you're running. And it won't give you any error saying what exactly you did wrong. It will just attempt to run the query that's under the cover that's driving this report using whatever you tell it to do. So there are a few strategies you can use to have more success in that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So if I click Add Object here, we'll see that in this view, we have this little exclamation point here. So some of the reports will provide pre-filtered class targeting. So whenever you see this filter options has been applied, that means that's what has occurred. It already has provided some filtering. So to see what that filtering is that it has already done, you can click the options button. And then now here at the option, we can see that it says already gone and targeted itself to Windows computers. So in this view, if I go back and if I were just to hit search, my research will only return Windows computer class objects, as we can see here. And that's what this report expects. It expects you to send it a Windows computer object. If you send it something else that it don't expect, your report will likely come up blank. So just keep that in mind. So I'm just going to click and I'm going to select some of the servers that's there. give us a list. So that's one way to do it. Another way, you could add a group. So you could go to add a group, and again you see that it says some filter options have been applied, and we see is that same filter option for Windows computer class that's already applied. So in this case, if I just hit search here, I'm going to see all of the groups that are exist in my environment. But as you see, you're getting some weird names and other things that may not be computer groups, just because SCOM is highly modular and there's all different type of components that it's aware of. So you may come in here and you see, say maybe this lab, you see that server name, and you may want to say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and add that. However, this report won't work with that object, because if you see the class says Microsoft System Center Management Service, so it's not a computer object. So if we were to run it against that, we'll likely just get a blank report for that result. Nothing will happen. So I'm going to just go ahead and remove that. So, but just keep that in mind when you're targeting this. So what you would want to do, if you have a computer group, you would go scroll down and find that computer group that you have. So SCOM does build out some computer groups for you automatically, and you can also create your own and publish and populate it with Windows computer objects. That would be the ideal thing that you would need to do. So just be careful with that when you're dealing with SCOM reporting, that you're feeding the report with the right class of object that it expects. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of that. So I have my computer object selected. We have our time and time zone selected. We have our aggregation type selected. And over here on the right hand side, you can go and select the type of metrics that you wanted to look through. So I'm going to just leave everything selected there, and we're just going to go ahead and run this report. So depending on the size of your environment and how many systems you fed into the report, it may take quite some time for the report to generate. Give it a few seconds, sometimes a few minutes, again depending on the volume of the data and the speed of your systems and your drives. That can all be have some variability in how long this takes. So mine is spinning here. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. Let's see what happens here. So I did make one quick edit as I was running the report. I realized for that particular report, I'm trying to run that across that many days. It's probably gonna either time out or not look quite what you expect. So what I did, I went and ran it again, changed a little bit as far as the date. So I ran it for a week, so I can get a summarization of like CPU, memory, and disk related metrics over that course of the week. So I did it for the 1st of September through September 8th, and you see on each line we're getting like just kind of what the CPU looked like on each server, and we'll have a list for each one of the counters. So we see memory. So you see on this server there wasn't much change on a day-to-day basis, pretty much the same. And then we're seeing memory here, seeing some metrics related to the disk to see that trend as far as how much space is used, minimal, maximums, disk latency, and then also network throughput. And so what we'll see in this report, there will be pretty much that whole output for every server that you selected in the list. All right, so some of these servers were offline, so if the server didn't have data for that period, right, you'll get a no data available. So I have a couple of those in this list here. But yeah, so that's that report. So let's go back to here to Windows Server Operating System reports, and now we're going to look at the performance by utilization report. So go ahead and double click on that. So this report is a little bit different. What this one can do is look across all of your systems and pick out like the top or most utilized or least utilized when it comes to CPU, memory, disk, and network throughput. So in this one, another difference you'll notice is that this one has only hourly and daily aggregation. In the Operation Data Warehouse database, data typically is stored in 3 different ways. So there's typically going to be a raw data type, and then we'll aggregate that data hourly, and then we will also aggregate that data daily. So you have those 2 physical or 3 physical data types in the database that you can reference. So for purpose of this, we will use the hourly aggregation, and then we'll go look at are from. So we'll use previous month, first day, and we'll go through, let's do a specific date. Let's go to September 8th. So we'll do September, oops, I think I went too far back. Let's do September 8th, there we go. All right, and then we'll select our time. So let's say we'll do 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. on the 8th. All right, have that set. And another difference on this report, as you can see, you don't need to deal with manually selecting like your classes and specific objects. This one deals solely with groups. But you do still have that caveat that you have to make sure that you're feeding it a group that actually contains computer objects. So if you feed it something else, you're likely going to get a blank page. So SCOM does create some computer groups automatically based on the manufacturer you have in the environment. But for this purpose, I will just use the all Windows computers group. But if you have your own group or some of these other groups are relevant for you, you can definitely use those as well. So we'll go all Windows computers. So what this is going to do across all of the computers in this environment, it's going to go and pick out the most utilized. And you can change this to least, right? So if you wanted to pick out the least utilized, you can do that, but we'll go with most. And then on the number of systems, you can go up to 50. So if all Windows computers had 1,000 computers in it, this will look through all 1,000 of those computers and pick out the top 50 most utilized ones out of that group. So, but I'm going to do top 10. And then down here on the manager groups, you'll just select the manager group that you're referencing. This only comes into play if you're sharing the data warehouse between multiple SCOM manager groups. You'll have checkboxes for each manager group. All right, so we're ready to run this. So let's go ahead and click run. Hopefully this doesn't take very long. Just be a couple seconds. Yep, there we go. All right. So now we're getting our data back. So just looking at the list here, we can see quickly this SCOM gateway server is actually running at least that week, was running pretty hot on CPU utilization. So it's about 51% utilized, and everything else is pretty low. And as you can see, it is color coded. So over here, see everything is green, so everything is pretty much above or below the threshold. But if we start looking at disk space, we can see this HVC server on this D drive is running dangerously hot as far as how much space is consuming. So it's almost at 99% full. So this is a good way to pull out and see any systems that are running or near running out of space. All of those will bubble up to the top. We keep going down. Now we're seeing information about memory, how many average pages per second a particular system is. And now we see that HV6 server again, it has very high paging going on. So it's probably experiencing some type of memory pressure that's causing it to constantly page at a high clip per second. Now we're looking at the logical disk average percent idle time. So this counter, when you're looking at it from a most perspective, is not very useful, because if it's most idle, that means it's not being used very much, right? So this counter comes into, is more useful when you run it against the least aggregation, because then that's going to say, hey, that disk is very busy if that number gets closer and closer to 0. I mean, like if it's like 1% idle, that means that disk is 99% of the time it's busy. But here it's the reverse, so it's nearly 93% idle. So it's only doing something 7% of the time. This is what that's really telling me. All right, so keep going down, we can see memory pressure, average percent memory, physical memory used across the systems. Again, we're seeing that HV6 system. So sometimes that average percent physical memory will correlate to average pages per second being high, right? So as we're seeing, this server is almost consuming all of its memory, so it's having to do a lot more paging out. Then we're seeing average millisecond per transfer. Again, we're seeing this HV6 server popping up again. 8F drive. Wow, that's pretty high. Yeah, that number seems weird. So yeah, maybe this system is probably experiencing some type of drive is about to die. I probably should check that out. All right, moving on down the list. we're seeing average percent bandwidth used on the network adapters. So it will just show us a percentage of the total. So one thing to keep in mind when it comes to network throughput or average percent bandwidth used on the network adapters, when you're dealing with virtualization, it's possible that these numbers can be inaccurate. And what I mean by that is that, say, physically you have a gigabit NIC, 1 gigabit NIC, but you have a virtual network adapter inside the VM that reports that it's connected at 10 gig, right? So SCOM will only see that 10 gig and it will do its calculation based on that 10 gig length. So for example, you may come in here, if you have that scenario, you may come in here and see, hey, I have 9% utilization. Say if this 0.31 was 9, and that would really mean in reality that I'm actually 90% consumed if I'm on a 1 gig link physically. So just keep that distinction in mind when you're looking at these numbers. If you have a situation where the VM network stack doesn't match the speed of the physical network stack. All right, moving on. So other thing we have here is average disk queue length. So if you have some disks that are queuing a lot, those will immediately bubble up to the top of the list. So that is that report. Very, very useful to just go and identify those hotspots you may have on your servers, or what servers are consuming very little or a whole lot. Can stand out here. So other thing you can do with this reporting is that you can schedule these reports to send out on a schedule, as opposed to you coming in running it on demand as you want to see it. You can have it say, hey, every Monday morning I'm gonna send this to me before I start work. So I'm gonna have it scheduled to send at 9 in the morning or 10 in the morning or whatever time you start work. It's pretty straightforward. So you'll give it a name. You select your delivery method. If you don't have your SQL reporting server configured to send email, you won't see email here as an option. So it looks like I have not done that in this environment. If you click on this and you also do not see email, you'll have to connect to your SQL reporting server, reporting configuration manager, and configure your email settings there. So since I don't have that, I'll just say file share. Then you go through and configure the settings as far as where the file share is, what's the path, if you need a username and password to connect to that file share. And then you also tell it what format do you want it to generate the report in. So I typically use PDF. It'll generate a PDF file and email it or drop it on a file share for me. All right. And so once you have all that configured, you just go through and configure your schedule. So it's pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and cancel out of that. So other things you can do, let's go out of here. So as mentioned, there's quite a few other reports available depending on what managed packs you have in your environment. So we'll talk about a few more here. So if I go to Microsoft ODR report library, you have a couple built-in reports here. If you go to generic report library, you have more here. I have this one for availability. That one can be useful to get an idea of what your availability is for either any object in SCOM. So it can be the whole computer, it can be a specific drive on some computer somewhere, it can be a specific SQL instance, it can be a domain controller. Any individual object that SCOM monitors, you can run an availability report against that object. There's one big thing to keep in mind when it comes to SCOM and availability, is that availability does not mean purely uptime, right? So you can have a system that's up 100% of the time, had no outages from a network standpoint, right? But if that system was in a critical condition from the perspective of SCOM that entire time, your availability numbers will be impacted by that, because SCOM takes that in consideration as well when it calculates availability. So if you're critical all the time, but the system was online, availability will not show 100%. It was going to show something else because of that. All right. Other thing, we have this configuration changes report. So that one can be useful to see if any of the properties that SCOM discovers have been changing. So for example, one of the properties that SCOM will discover on Windows computers is what OU and Active Directory that computer is a part of. So if someone moved that system to a different OU, that will actually show up in our configuration changes report, because that property would be changing. So that's a good way to see those things. And then we have things like most common alerts. So that's one you probably would run very frequently to get some insights into what's going on there. So let's open that one up. Let's go to most common alerts. Double click on it, and here the interface looks very similar to what we saw on those other two reports. So here we'll go ahead and select a time range. So for this one, I'll just say this week Sunday through today, and again I'll go from 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. All right. And then we have this that says in. So I wish it said something else here, but what this is like show me the top 5 or show me the top 10, whatever number you put in here, right? It's going to show you like the top N of alerts for that time period. And then over here on the right, you can go and select specific managed packs that you want to have in scope. So if you wanted to just know, hey, how many alerts did we get, or what's the top alerts coming from the Active Directory managed packs, I could go through here and uncheck everything here, and then just check the Active Directory ones if that's what I want to do. Otherwise, you can just leave everything checked. And typically, I run it with everything checked. So let's leave it there default, and let's run it. All right, so here in my environment, you get this output. So most common alerts across the selected objects, you get this nice little graph showing how those things break down. So 71% of my alerts over that period of time was related to this Microsoft System Center agent monitoring host handle count threshold, where I had some agents that were constantly breaching that, and it generated a large number of alerts during that period of time. So I think I have fixed that since then, but that just kind of gives you some idea of how you can use the reports. So to give you a breakdown of those top 10, and if you keep scrolling down, you'll get a little bit more details on what percentages and the exact number count and all of that. So, all right. So that is reporting. There's a lot of other reports. There's each one's going to have a little bit of nuance as far as what you have to do to configure it, but the core of it will be the same across all of the reports that are available here. One of the key things to keep in mind is that try to make sure you're feeding the report the type of class that it expects, and you'll probably have a better luck in generating reports successfully. And those details, the report details, be sure to just take a look at that before you try to run the report. A lot of time it'll give you some hints on what exactly that report expects. So hopefully this has been useful, and I will see you in the next one.